Pay attention to Dontaeus Wiles, 40 years old, walking out of Happy Foods grocery store at 31st and Myrtle in Kansas City at 4:47 p.m. on March 16, 2019. He has less than 2 minutes left to live because Dontae Campbell, a 30-year-old stranger he's never met, is sitting in a silver Chrysler Sebring 40 feet away, watching his every move through a GPS tracking app on his phone. On this afternoon, Dontaeus just wanted to buy groceries with his wife and go home to make dinner for their 2 young children. On this afternoon, someone had paid Campbell and his crew to make sure Dontaeus never made it home. This is the story of a $29 Amazon GPS tracker that turned a father of 2 into a target, and how a credit card receipt became the evidence that convicted his killers.
A father was gunned down in broad daylight today outside a Kansas City grocery store. Witnesses say more than a dozen shots were fired in a parking lot filled with families and children. Police are calling it an execution.
Dontaeus Wiles lived for his family. At 40, he balanced a full-time job at a warehouse distribution center on Prospect Avenue with weekend shifts driving for Uber just to keep his wife and 2 children, ages 8 and 5, comfortable in their modest home near 35th and Cleveland. His friends described him as the kind of man who never missed a payment, never forgot a birthday, never complained about the grind. He'd grown up in Kansas City, attended Manual High School, played basketball well enough to almost get a college scholarship before a knee injury derailed those dreams. So instead of going pro, Dontaeus went to work. He got married at 24 to his high school sweetheart, Shayla. They had their first child 2 years later. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Dontaeus was solid, his cousin later told reporters. He showed up, he provided, he protected. That's who he was. On March 16, 2019, Dontaeus had the afternoon off from the warehouse. It was a Saturday. His son had a basketball game that morning. Dontaeus never missed those, and afterward, he and Shayla decided to run errands together. They needed groceries for the week. Shayla wanted to meal prep on Sunday. Dontaeus drove their red Chevy Tahoe to Happy Foods, a small neighborhood grocery store they'd been shopping at for years. What Dontaeus didn't know was that for the past 29 days, a small magnetic GPS tracker, no bigger than a matchbox, had been attached to the undercarriage of his Tahoe, just behind the rear axle. And 3 men in a silver Chrysler Sebring had been following the blue dot on their phones for the past hour, waiting for the perfect moment. Dontae Campbell was 30 years old and invisible. No flashy social media. No public criminal record that would raise immediate red flags. No obvious gang affiliations. He lived quietly on the east side of Kansas City, worked sporadically in construction, and to neighbors seemed like just another guy trying to get by. But Dontae Campbell had a side business. He was what federal prosecutors would later describe as a tracker for hire, a digital stalker who used consumer technology to surveil targets for anyone willing to pay. If you wanted the concept, on the side. His partner in this enterprise was Michael Smith, 35, equally unassuming, equally dangerous. Together, they operated a brutal business model that was shockingly simple. Accept payment to track a target. Buy GPS devices on Amazon using their real names and credit cards. Attach the devices to targets' vehicles. Monitor movements for days or weeks to establish patterns. Provide real-time location data to whoever paid for the hit. Sometimes, participate in the actual ambush. On February 15, 2019, exactly 1 month before Dontaeus Wiles was murdered, Dontae Campbell logged into his Amazon account and purchased a Landair C54 GPS tracking device for $29.99. He used his real name, his real credit card, his real home address for shipping. The device arrived on February 18th. Campbell activated it on February 19th using a subscription service that cost $19.99 per month, paid automatically from his personal bank debit card. The subscription provided real-time GPS updates every 3 minutes via a smartphone app. Between February 19th and March 16th, 2019, that tracker monitored Dontaeus Wiles' red Chevy Tahoe for 26 days straight. Every trip to work, every Uber ride, every errand, every visit to his kid's school. Campbell and Smith knew Dontaeus' life better than most of his friends did. And on March 16th, when the GPS showed Dontaeus at Happy Foods grocery store, a location with a crowded parking lot, multiple exit routes, and limited security cameras, they made their move. Saturday, March 16th, 2019, started as a normal weekend day for Dontaeus and Shayla Wiles. They woke up early for their son's basketball game at the community center on 39th Street. Donteus cheered from the stands, filming highlights on his phone to send to relatives. After the game, they grabbed lunch at a local barbecue spot, then headed home to change before running errands. At 4:22 p.m., GPS data from the tracker showed the red Tahoe leaving Donteus' home and traveling south on Prospect Avenue. At 4:35 p.m., the vehicle turned into the parking lot of Happy Foods grocery store at 4019 E 31st Street. The store was busy. Saturday afternoons always were. Families shopping for the week, elderly couples buying ingredients for Sunday dinners, kids begging for snacks while parents filled carts. The parking lot had about 30 vehicles scattered across 50 spaces. People walked in and out, carrying bags, pushing carts, chatting on phones. Donteus and Shayla parked near the entrance. They walked into the store together, grabbed a cart, and spent about 25 minutes shopping. Security footage from inside the store shows them laughing in the produce section. Donteus comparing two different brands of cereal, Shayla adding juice boxes to the cart. At 4:47 p.m., they walked out of Happy Foods, carrying 4 plastic bags filled with groceries. Donteus was holding 2 bags in his left hand, keys in his right. Shayla walked beside him, texting someone on her phone, probably her mother, letting her know they'd be home soon. 40 feet away, a silver Chrysler Sebring sat idling in the parking lot. 3 men inside, Dante Campbell in the driver's seat, Michael Smith in the back seat. A third man, later identified as Marcus Lawhorn, 28 inches the front passenger seat, with a 9mm handgun in his lap. What happened next was captured by 3 separate witnesses, 2 cell phone videos, and 1 exterior security camera from a neighboring business. As Donteus and Shayla approached their red Tahoe, the silver Sebring suddenly accelerated across the parking lot and screeched to a stop directly beside them. The passenger door flew open. Marcus Lawhorn jumped out, raised the 9mm, and started firing. Bang, 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 bang. 4 shots in rapid succession. Donteus threw his body in front of Shayla, shoving her toward the ground. She screamed. Grocery bags exploded, cans and boxes scattering across the pavement. The first bullet hit Donteus in his right shoulder. The second hit his chest. The third missed. The fourth hit his abdomen. Donteus collapsed against the Tahoe, sliding down the driver's side door, leaving a streak of blood on the red paint. Shayla crawled under the vehicle, screaming his name, screaming for help. But the shooting wasn't over. While Lawhorn stood over Donteus, firing, Dante Campbell jumped out of the driver's seat and ran to the rear of the Tahoe. He crouched down, reaching under the vehicle near the rear axle, frantically trying to retrieve the GPS tracker. His hands fumbled. He couldn't find it, couldn't get the magnet to release. Lawhorn fired 3 more shots. Witnesses were screaming now, running for cover, pulling children behind cars. Campbell gave up on retrieving the tracker. He ran back to the Sebring. Lawhorn followed. They drove across the parking lot, circled around the building, then came back for a second pass. This time, they pulled up alongside the Tahoe from the opposite side. Campbell tried again to remove the tracker. Lawhorn stood outside the Sebring and fired 10 more rounds at Donteus, who was now lying motionless on the pavement. Total shots fired. 17. Then they fled, tires screeching, engine roaring. The entire ambush lasted less than 90 seconds. Shayla Wiles crawled out from under the Tahoe, covered in her husband's blood. She pressed her hands against the bullet wounds in his chest, screaming at him to stay awake, to keep breathing, to hold on. Other shoppers ran over to help. Someone called 911. A nurse who'd been grocery shopping started chest compressions. Paramedics arrived at 4:51 p.m., 4 minutes after the first shot. They loaded Donteus into the ambulance and rushed him to Research Medical Center. Surgeons worked for 47 minutes trying to save his life. Donteus Wiles was pronounced dead at 5:38 p.m. Cause of death: multiple gunshot wounds. Bullets had punctured his lung, liver, and stomach. He'd lost too much blood. There was nothing more they could do. Shayla collapsed in the hospital waiting room when doctors told her she'd been married to Donteus for 16 years. They had 2 children who were now waiting at home with their grandmother, expecting Daddy to walk through the door with groceries for dinner. Instead, Shayla had to drive home alone and tell an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old that their father was never coming back. Kansas City Police Department's homicide unit responded to Happy Foods within minutes. Lead Detective Brian Walker secured the scene and began interviewing witnesses. Multiple people described the silver Sebring. Several had caught glimpses of the license plate. 2 had recorded cell phone videos showing the vehicle fleeing the scene. But the critical piece of evidence was still attached to the victim's Tahoe. When crime scene technicians processed Danteus's vehicle, they found the GPS tracker exactly where Dante Campbell had desperately tried to retrieve it. A small black device, no bigger than a deck of cards, magnetically clamped to the frame behind the rear axle. The serial number on the device was traced back to the manufacturer, Landair C GPS. Detectives contacted the company, requesting subscriber information. The company complied within 24 hours, providing the evidence that would break the case wide open. Device serial number LS5488291. Purchase date the 15th of February 2019. Purchase location Amazon.com. Purchaser name Dante Campbell. Credit card used Visa ending in 442. 9 registered to Dante Campbell. Shipping address 3847 E 42nd Terrace, Kansas City. M.O. Dante Campbell's home. Activation date the 19th of February 2019. Subscription payment $19.99. Month via bank debit card ending in 7821 registered to Dante Campbell. Detective Walker couldn't believe what he was reading. The suspect had purchased a GPS tracker used in a premeditated murder using his real name, his real credit card, and his real address. It was the kind of arrogance or stupidity that makes prosecutors' jobs easy. On March 22, 2019, 6 days after the murder, Kansas City police executed arrest warrants for Dante Campbell, Michael Smith, and Marcus Lawhorn. All 3 were charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Campbell was arrested at his home without incident. Smith was arrested at a construction site. Lawhorn fled but was apprehended 3 days later in Raytown, Missouri. All 3 denied involvement. Campbell claimed he'd lost his Amazon account password months earlier, and someone must have used his account without permission. Smith claimed he'd never heard of Danteus Wiles. Lawhorn invoked his right to remain silent, but the evidence was overwhelming. Amazon purchase records showed Dante Campbell's account purchasing the GPS tracker on the 15th of February 2019. Credit card statements showed Campbell's Visa card charged $29.99 on the 15th of February 2019. Bank statements showed Campbell's debit card charged $19.99 monthly for GPS tracking subscription service beginning the 19th of February 2019. GPS data logs extracted from the recovered device showing 26 days of tracking Danteus Wiles' movements. Cell tower records placed Campbell's and Smith's phones in the vicinity of Happy Foods at the time of the murder. Surveillance footage showed the silver Sebring circling the parking lot before and after the shooting. Witness testimony. Multiple shoppers identified Lawhorn as the shooter from photo lineups. Ballistics evidence. 17 spent 9mm shell casings recovered from the scene. The prosecution's theory was simple. Someone wanted Danteus Wiles dead. They hired Campbell and Smith to track him. Campbell bought the GPS device, attached it to Wiles' vehicle, and monitored his movements for nearly a month. When Wiles' location showed him at a crowded grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, Campbell, Smith, and Lawhorn executed the ambush. But prosecutors couldn't prove why anyone would want Danteus dead. He had no gang affiliations, no significant debts, no known enemies. Detectives theorized it might be related to something Danteus witnessed months earlier, a separate shooting he'd told police about, but they couldn't definitively connect the cases. What they could prove was how he was killed, and the GPS tracker was the smoking gun. In October 2021, 2.5 years after Danteus' murder, federal prosecutors filed additional charges against Campbell and Smith. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri charged both men with conspiracy to commit cyberstalking, 18 U.S.C. Section 2261A, aiding and abetting cyberstalking, resulting in death, 18 U.S.C. Section 2261A. The federal charges were strategic. While Missouri prosecutors pursued first-degree murder charges in state court, Federal prosecutors pursued cyberstalking charges that carried life sentences and didn't require proving who actually pulled the trigger. Under federal law, cyberstalking is defined as using electronic communications or tracking devices to harass, intimidate, or cause substantial emotional distress to another person. When that cyberstalking results in death, the penalty is the same as murder: life in federal prison without parole. Assistant U.S. Attorney Bradley Kavanaugh explained the strategy in a press conference. Even if we can't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Donta Campbell personally fired the shots that killed Donta Wiles, we can prove he bought the tracking device. We can prove he attached it to the victim's vehicle. We can prove he monitored the victim's movements for weeks. And we can prove he participated in the ambush. That's cyberstalking resulting in death. That's life in prison. On the 5th of November 2023, facing overwhelming digital evidence and a potential life sentence, Donta Campbell accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of aiding and abetting cyberstalking resulting in death. In his plea agreement, Campbell admitted he purchased a GPS tracking device on Amazon in February 2019. He activated the device using his personal bank card. He attached the device to Donta Wiles' red Chevy Tahoe. He monitored Wiles' location for approximately 1 month. He traveled to Happy Foods grocery store on the 16th of March 2019 based on GPS data showing Wiles at that location. He attempted to retrieve the GPS device during and after the shooting. In exchange for his cooperation, federal prosecutors agreed to recommend a sentence of 30 years instead of life. Campbell also agreed to testify against Michael Smith and Marcus Lawhorn if their cases went to trial. Campbell's attorney, Joshua Irwin, told reporters after the plea hearing, "Mr. Campbell deeply regrets his actions. He acknowledges that his decision to use tracking technology to facilitate this crime resulted in the death of an innocent father. He hopes his cooperation will bring some measure of closure to the Wiles family." But closure was the last thing Shayla Wiles felt when she heard Campbell's plea. Shayla Wiles sat in the federal courtroom gallery during Campbell's plea hearing, flanked by Donta mother and sister. When Campbell admitted to tracking her husband for a month, Shayla broke down, sobbing. "He watched my husband for 29 days, she later told reporters outside the courthouse. "He knew where Donta went to work. He knew where our kids went to school. He knew when we went grocery shopping. He hunted my husband like an animal. And for what? Money? We'll never even know who paid for this. We'll never know why." Donta children, now 12 and 9, have been in therapy since their father's murder. His son quit playing basketball. The sport reminds him too much of the last morning he spent with his dad. His daughter still asks her mother when Daddy is coming home, even though it's been 5 years. She draws pictures of him and leaves them on his grave every Sunday. The Donta Wiles case became a landmark federal prosecution demonstrating how consumer technology designed for legitimate purposes, tracking teen drivers, monitoring fleet vehicles, finding lost pets, can be weaponized to commit murder. Legal experts testified before Congress in 2024, using the Wiles case as an example of the need for stronger regulations on GPS tracking devices. Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington introduced the Anti-Stalking Technology Act, which would require criminal background checks for GPS tracker purchases, mandatory registration of tracking devices with law enforcement, alerts sent to vehicle owners when unknown tracking devices are detected, penalties for retailers who sell trackers without proper documentation. Privacy advocates opposed the legislation, arguing it would create a surveillance database and infringe on legitimate uses of tracking technology. As of January 2026, the bill remains stalled in committee. Meanwhile, Landair CGPS and similar companies continue to sell thousands of tracking devices monthly on Amazon, Walmart, and eBay. No questions asked. No background checks required. Donta Campbell is serving his 30-year sentence at USP Leavenworth. He will be eligible for release in 2048 when he is 60 years old. Michael Smith's federal trial is scheduled for June 2026. He faces life in prison if convicted. Marcus Lawhorn pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Missouri State Court in 2022. He was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. The person who allegedly paid Campbell and Smith to track and kill Donta Wiles has never been identified or charged. That part of the investigation remains open. Donta Wiles is buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery in Kansas City. His headstone reads, "Beloved husband, father, friend, forever 40. His family visits every Saturday, the same day of the week he was murdered. The GPS tracker that monitored Dantes for 29 days is stored in an evidence locker at the Kansas City Police Department. It will remain there until all appeals are exhausted, potentially decades from now. But the data it collected, GPS coordinates showing every place Dantes went, every routine he followed, every moment he thought he was living a normal life while being hunted, that data convicted his killers. On the afternoon of March 16, 2019, Dantes Wiles thought he was just buying groceries with his wife, planning dinner, looking forward to putting his kids to bed that night and watching basketball highlights later. He had no idea that a $29 device purchased on Amazon had been tracking his every move for a month. He had no idea that 3 strangers were watching a blue dot on their phones, waiting for him to be in the right place at the right time. He had no idea that when he walked out of Happy Foods carrying plastic bags full of food for his family, he was walking into an execution, because technology had told them exactly where he'd be. This is Dantes' story. This is Dantes' justice. This is what happens when surveillance tools designed to track cars are used to hunt people. And somewhere in Kansas City, 2 children are growing up without their father because a man used his own credit card to buy the device that got their daddy killed.